And they only had a couple of doctors with them, one British doctor.
One British doctor.
By the name of Vincent Bennett, Major Vincent Bennett. Mm.
But no, I mean, it was pitiful to see them. They were,
yes.
You know, they were too far gone altogether.
Yes. Now, you told me you were in a particular location when the war ended. Was that Kashu Mountain Camp? Was that where you
Where
were?
was I when the war ended?
Was it Kashu?
No, it would be on one of these bridges.
Yes. Were you up at Prachai or anywhere like that?
No, where Chumphong was a large railway yard.
Yes.
And we worked on the bridge that was just south of Chumphong.
Mm.
And then all the other bridges were further south. But we didn't go over the border into Malaysia.
No.
Malaya as it was then. But you know, they're all south of there.
Yes.
And we would be moving. Well, most of the time we lived in the train.
Yes.
And they'd park it on a loop.
Yes.
A siding.
Yes.
And you'd come when you got home at night. You see everything would be riddled with holes with that .5 machine guns and run up the length of the train.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, when you came down from Nakhon Pathon, were there any of the bridges knocked out, and the train was unable to proceed any further?
Well, eventually, look, see, one of the good sights we used to see was the RAF. They were. They came from Chittagong, and they were all liberators. And well, they both are RAAF and RAF. Because one of my friends, who now died, he lived down in surface after the war, he was one of the pilots. He was, they're dropping them on me.
Yes.
And like he was a RAF, but seconded to the RAF.
Yes.
And I mean, he told me after the war, you see, that some of the doctors I knew in the RAF, they knew that they had sheets on their beds when they went to bed in Chittagong, when they knew we didn't have it.
Yes, yeah.
But but one of the good sights was to see the machine gun steam locomotive.
Yes.
When all this water starts squirting out everywhere.
Yes, as long as you weren't on the train.
Yeah, that's right. But then we weren't on the train.
No.
Most of our travelling, after being taken down by a train, was on those little car things, you know, the four-wheeler cars.
Yes, yes.
Not the truck with the bogie on the front.
No.
They had little four-wheeler things.
Yes, yeah.
And like a Jeep, the golf carts were about the size of them. And two prisoners would be sitting at the back there.
Yes,
There'd be two Japs in front. But they never spoke to us. Now, this was 45, don't forget.
Yes, yeah.
And we used to take it at light and this night in a good full moon, so lovely moon over Tokyo tonight, and this sort of thing. We used to taunt them like one thing in 45, and of course they were getting very concerned.
Now there's a fellow who was in Hintok Mountain Camp with you, by the name of Des Jackson. Did you ever meet him?
Des Jackson?
Des Jackson?
Jackson?
Yeah.
The Tasmanian?
Yeah.
The magistrate or something. I know him quite well.
Yeah. Now, was he down on the line with you towards the end?
Was he at Hintok?
Well, he was a second, third machine gunner.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I know him quite well.
Yeah. Yeah. But was he with you in 1945 when you were down on the border?
Did he come down on that, I can't remember. No. You look, we were pretty exhausted in that party because we used to work 12 hours on and 24 off. And then it was 12 hours on and 12 hours off, and then eventually it became 24 hours on and 12 hours off, by which time we'd had it.
Yeah. I think there's an expression, you're buggered.
They were panicking, of course, badly. See, once you had an engine shot up between two bridges that were down, well, they couldn't even get the prisoners to push those wooden See, we built wooden railways around bridges.
Yes, yeah.
Wooden rails, wooden sleepers.
Yes.
And wooden wheels on wooden axles. And we'd load that on out of one train on one side, push it around and up the other side, and unload it. Yeah. And one of the things we used to do then was we'd sing while we were working. And if we had gas cylinders, and if you open a gas cylinder, you'll find it makes an awful scream. And we'd all be screaming on this note as we undid the gas cylinder. And by the time it got to where it was going, it would have been empty. Yes. Yeah, it'd be oxygen or acetylene or something. Yeah. And anyway, that's the only sort of stuff that we could do in sabotage. Yeah.
Now, Maurice, where were you when the war ended?
Well, I was on that Bangkok-Singapore railway line.
Yes. Yeah.
I think I was back in Chumphong. Yes. And we had a Jap captain. Yeah, I think he was. And see, we only had sergeant majors as commanders by then. All the lieutenants and captains has all been removed to Nakhon Pathon, I think it was, sort of northeast of Bangkok. And our sergeant major, I think he was a second, 30th fellow, but a very decent fellow, and he would tackle the Japanese, you know, the Thais were wrapping the news around a stone and tossing it over the wall into our cookhouse, which was on the boundary of the camp. And we knew the war was over because the Thais were telling us, and they were getting pretty cheeky too with the Japs by then. And, you know, he said, well, the officer said, look, I've had no orders, so I can't do anything. But he did present us with a book which he'd stolen out of somebody's house somewhere in English. Yes. He did present us with that. And this went on for a couple of days, and then eventually a train arrived from the south, and it was already loaded up with prisoners on its way to Bangkok to outfit us in the clothing that had been stored in stores but never allowed to be issued to us, and we would be able to use the drugs that were there also that we were never issued or never allowed to even know they were there. And generally they did their best to make times as tough as they could for us, without any doubt. Anyway, this train, we had to march down to the station, bring all your gear, and you just had to fit on the train as best you could. And some of them were sitting up on the top of the trucks, which was a bit risky because you had to make sure that you didn't get hit when you went over a damaged bridge or something. Yes. You see? Because some of these bridges might be a bit cockeyed and that straightened the line. But if you can imagine a bridge like that.
Okay, trains don't like that.
Yeah, yes, you can hardly imagine the engineering or the makeshift engineering that by 45. Yes. It was getting very chicory.
Yes, yeah. Now, they took you into Bangkok. Where did you go to after that?
No, we didn't get to Bangkok.
Oh, you didn't?
We got to Phetburi.
Oh, yes, yeah.
Yeah, Phetburi that's where the Konyu, it crosses the railway line and goes into the South China Sea, or whatever they call it. Yes. And yeah, we got there at late afternoon for a meal stop. And it was just on dusk. And before we knew there were E group in the areas in where we were. We knew they were down on the Kra Isthmus. And I've read a very interesting book about the underground in Malaya after the war. They stayed there from, you know, as they were going down the peninsula until the peace in 45, a lot of them. Yes. Yeah, they were wonderful. And same in New Guinea, in the islands. Yes. Anyway, this is what happened, you see, that we got on the train, we had this meal alongside the train, and there was one truck with the Jap officer in it, and then the next one was all the guard. They shouted there, and 1/5 Hussar, Captain Macklin, and about 20, I would say, Chinese guerrillas who became Chim Kang's force after the war.
Yes.
Remember the insurgents in Malaya?
Malaya.
Yeah, well, these were the same fellas. They changed size after the war. They disarmed the guard. They just sort of came in out of the shadows, and each man had picked a man, you see, and they disarmed them. And then the decision was made then that the Jap guard would be there overnight in front of the Jap officers, trucked, so that, you know, it was a complete shame, the dishonour that they suffered from doing that.
Yes.
Yeah. And then the next day, we had to march, about 16 kilos I think it was, and we had 2 trucks they'd commandeered to cart the gear, and then they gradually, the trucks went back and forth, they picked up the stragglers at the end, and we arrived at an airstrip, Kashu, that the Australians were building.
Yes.
Yeah, and that would have been a working party that probably started from Nakhon Pathon too.
Yes, yeah.
So there we were. We were free then, and I was at that Kashu place. We were warned not to be too keen on making alcoholic grog out of coconut and raisins. If you put about 3 raisins in a coconut and plug it up properly, you can make a very good alcoholic drink.
Yes.
Yes. You know, and strangely enough, I ended up there in the hospital, and there was a sergeant, a medical sergeant from British, I think he was, who was there. And see, the Americans, any Americans went first. And then the Brits were taken to Rangoon, and we were all going to be taken to Rangoon too. And I don't know whether the Australian government messed us up or what, but we then had to wait for the Australian commandeered ships up to take us home. But we never went to, we were supposed to go to Rangoon.
So did you go back
to Rangoon?
Did you go down to Singapore or?
Yes, we were taken,
how'd you get
flown to Singapore.
Yes.
And then we had about a week or 10 days on Singapore Island, where we were wonderfully catered for by the RAF.
Yes.
Yeah, they were very good.
Did you have any contact with that organisation called RAPWE?
Oh yes, well, RAPWE immediately wanted to know all about you.
Yes, yeah. And do you remember any of the people on the RAPWE staff?
Did I know any of them? No, I didn't. But no, I can't remember even the names of any of them, but they weren't people that I knew.
No.
They probably came from Sydney for a start, you see.
When you're in Singapore, did you have any medical treatment, or did you have any contact with the medical people?
We must have had some. On the ship I was, in the ship's hospital.
Okay.
Yeah, I was in the hospital.
So which ship was that?
The ship, yeah.
Which ship was that?
That was the Highland Brigade.
Oh, Highland Brigade, yeah.
And it was about, what, a 20,000 tonner?
Yeah.
And it was a
chilled
meat ship. It went from England to South America.
Yes, you had a lot of people crammed on that, didn't you?
Oh yes, it was really loaded with troops.
Well, that officer I mentioned to you, Fred Smedley, he was on that.
Oh, Smedley? Oh, was he?
Yeah, and Colonel Norm Eadie. I've got some photographs of the people. The officers were on the deck down the back, you know, looking after themselves.
Were they?
Yeah.
No, it was on the Sabayak that we used to be right at the stern.
Yes, yeah.
And, you know, the water would be just about 2 or 3 feet below the deck.
Yes.
When she was down in a trough, and you go way up here.
Yeah.
And there was no water anywhere. It just disappeared. But that was going through the bight. It was well, when you saw the Aquitania doing what it did, you can realise what your own vessel must have been doing.
Now, which Australian capital did you? Which Australian capital